Hi, welcome back to the 1 in 20 show. It's been a while since we've done an episode, believe it or not, and I'm so excited to be back today with Grant Horner. Grant is a professor and scholar who is focused on English literature and arts history and culture for close to 30 years. He speaks 8 languages, among which are Classical Latin and Koine Greek. I studied under Grant on an abroad trip to Italy, where we studied the fine arts in the place that they were originated. He truly opened my mind to logic and deep thinking and why it is absolutely necessary for us to do so. Apart from his studies, Grant is also an avid rock climber and currently holds the speed record for the nose route of El Capitan in Yosemite. We've got lots to get into. Dr. Horner, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Evan.
Yep, I'm really excited to have you on. I get like a little anxious whenever I do an episode with one of my mentors, because it's cool to, I just draw so much knowledge from you, and I'm just excited about this whole thing. Wanted to ask you first, do you remember when you first wanted to study the arts? So I guess this is going way back when, even to childhood, and when you first remember wanting to get into this.
I remember as a little kid, I used to spend a lot of time in the summer at my grandparents' house in Roanoke, Virginia, where I was born. And they had a lot of art books laying around. My grandfather was a writer and a magazine editor. And they, had the kind of a general interest in arts and culture and things like that. And they had this gigantic book. I mean, it must have weighed 75 pounds. It was as big as I was. And it just said Leonardo da Vinci. And I didn't know who that was. But the cover was beautiful. It was just a close-up of Jesus' face in a fresco from the famous Last Supper. And I remember looking at that, and I would open the pages, and I'd flip back and forth. And I thought, oh, it's like pictures of this guy Jesus, whoever that is. But then there were pictures of men with wings strapped to their arms, and there were pictures of dams with water spilling over and making certain kind of swirling patterns, and there were pictures of frescoes and oil paintings and all kinds of complex architectural plans and fortifications. And I just remember poring over that book over and over and over again, wondering, who is this guy, and where is he from, and how did he do all these things?
Wow, amazing. That's cool. And did that end up kind of spiraling? I was going to kind of lead into this too, throughout your time studying just the arts and education. You studied and taught on philosophers like Plato and Milton. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to ask you kind of, what have you learned from studying the classics? I know that this is kind of based off of that first question where you first, came about seeing what is this art thing? And I want to study it, like you said, that book. Right. So what led you into then studying the classics?
Well, the reason that things are classics is because they're good. I mean, there's Mark Twain's old joke, a classic is someone that no one wants to read, but everyone wants to have read, right? Because, they must be boring. Yeah, some classic works of literature or art or film might be considered boring, but most classics become classics because over time, they bear rereading or rewatching or reviewing or something like that. So if something is really good, if it is what we might call high quality, then it'll last over time. A lot of things are created by human beings, talented human beings, and they'll make something interesting or beautiful, but it just kind of passes away and it's gone. It's ephemeral. But when someone makes something that is later referred to as a classic, it's because of the Latin word classis, which means standard. It reaches some kind of standard, and it may be hard to put your finger on exactly what that is. Maybe it's its ability to produce something of just perfect proportion, or maybe it is something that has a very unusual blend of colors on an oil painting, or maybe it's a film that is narrated a certain way that no one has ever really quite done it that way before, or it's a novel that explores depths of human psychology, or it's a theological, philosophical work that does something new and different, or maybe it's not that new, maybe it's not that different, but it's done in such a way that it makes an impression that sticks. Because if you paint something, you write something, you make a movie, and it doesn't remain in the memory of your auditors, of your viewer, then it doesn't mean it doesn't have value. It just means it's going to be forgotten. And so a classic is something that is remembered. And as much as I have read in my 54 years, and as many paintings as I've seen, and movies I have watched, and books that I've studied, there is still far, far, far more that I have not looked at, and that I probably will not get to before I leave this earth. But part of the life of a scholar and a person who likes art is you have to learn how to divide up your time, right? It's just like a syllabus. You might want to assign every book written in the Renaissance in your Renaissance class. You can't do it. You don't want your students dead halfway through the semester. Well, maybe you do. And you have to have the knowledge of them yourself. And so a syllabus is always an exercise in editing, and your life is always an exercise in editing, because you're not going to have time to read everything. You can't watch every movie. You probably shouldn't. And you can't listen to every song. Some songs you want to listen to over and over again. Some books are worth rereading. Others maybe or not. So that's why the whole idea of editing, whether it's editing a text or editing a movie or editing music, is so interesting, because it's all about control with the aim of producing the best possible product. And you want your life at the end to be the best it can be. And part of that is management and stewardship of your time, including what do you read and what do you look at.
Wow. Amazing. That's kind of a perfect nutshell, because I wanted to say too that I think a lot of people, even my age, and one of the things that you told me, even just as a visual artist, when we were in Italy, I remember coming out and talking with you under those oak trees, or those nice olive trees in Tuscany, and you were just sitting out there drinking your tea, and I think you were reading or something, and I just remember feeling like I could come to you and talk to you because you were knowledgeable about so many things. And I was struggling so hard with, I don't know if you remember this conversation, but I was just struggling so hard with like anxiety and different things. And I asked you, is being learned something that helps you as not only as an artist, but as a person, that brings you out of your shell and kills that anxiety so that you can just do your work? And I wanted to ask you if you wanted to summarize something or say something to that, because I think a lot of people, young artists, want to know.
Sure.
What's the balance between how much do I have to read and how much book smart and how much practical information that I have to have.
A lot of students are anxious, like, they get their syllabi and their reading list and they buy their books and like, how am I ever going to do this? I've got a part-time job. I've got a boyfriend. I've got this and that and the other thing. And so anxiety for a student, or for a young kid, or for an adult, or for an old person, anxiety is almost a natural human state. It's very normal. It's not something to be ashamed of. I struggle with anxiety, or I tend to be a little nervous, or I worry about the future. Jesus talks about, the reason that worrying is something that if you're a Christian, that you can avoid. You can actually put it away. You can escape it. But anxiety is perfectly natural, because none of us knows in detail what's going to happen next. This is why movies are so much fun. This is why novels are so great, right? You look at a painting, it's a different experience. You're like, well, what's going to happen next? Well, nothing. It's a 500-year-old oil painting. It's not changing. But a novel, the first time through, a movie the first time through, the whole hook for the audience is you have to make them care about what's going to happen next. They have to care about what's going to happen next. That's the key to screenwriting or to novel writing. And so when you don't know what's going to happen next, some people's minds, the way that your minds are structured, you'll be a little bit more tending to worry about that. And other people are like, I'll take it as I come. I'm a surfer. I don't really worry, dude. And other people are like, well, what if I can't pay the bills? What if I get hit by a truck? What if I don't get into this graduate school, or whatever the case may be? Anxiety, I think, in some ways can be tamed just at the human level by taking the time to study the world around you, to read well and read widely, and those are not the same thing. It's better to learn how to read well than to read widely. It would be better to read 4 or 5 good books and read them well over and over your whole life than to have read, the 400 greatest classic plays and novels. Okay, quantity of experience is much better. Is often too overrated. Quality of experience is certainly more important. I could have run you guys through twice as many museums and had you read twice as many books, but it would have ruined it in 6 weeks, right? You would have hated it. So I wanted you to walk through a museum with me, and sometimes, like with Giorgione's La Tempesta, The Tempest, in the Accademia in Venice, we stood there for an hour with one oil painting. Last summer, I had one student, and she has never liked art, never been interested in painting, and she stood there during that hour, and we had the same kinds of conversations about this mysterious, strange painting that most people walk by, they don't even notice it. It's not particularly interesting until you start to fall into it like a labyrinth. And she was reduced to tears. That piece of art had captured her. And I think that when you read and you live in a world of ideas and you study art and you think about film and about music, it can have a certain kind of calming, relaxing effect, because all of those are meditative processes, right? What drives me crazy is people who strap on their roller skates before they go in the art museum and they're skating by. What do I tell you when you walk into a room that has 40 paintings on the wall?
Yeah,
What do I tell you? I tell you, go in and follow your eyes and pick out one or two things that your eyes draw you to and just look at and just contemplate those. You don't have to see them all. It doesn't matter. That's not what education is. Better to contemplate one beautiful thing than scan 50.
Boom.
And so I think that what happens is when it comes to academics, when it comes to art, people think that they have to master it all. It is much more about the experience and how it can transform your soul than it is about, now, can I name, the 25 best Dutch oil painters between 1720 and 1735? Who cares? Doesn't matter.
Exactly. Wow, that was wonderful. That's a perfect summation, I think, of a lot of things that we bring up on the show with different people. Mm-hmm. And I think from coming from you, and I would consider you even a philosopher because of your thought and the amount that you put into your writing and your reading and teaching. I think that's cool because in a lot of ways, art can be such a free form thing. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of kids our age, are told in our day and age to feel a certain way, right? And then by doing so, then create the art you want to make. But in a lot of ways, even in the film perspective, I've learned what you just said, in that what's the point in knowing all the factual, advice, or not advice, but all the factual information over the years of all the films that people have made? Who cares if you haven't seen a film? It's what you've seen and what you've taken out of it.
Right.
Like you just said. I don't know if you wanted to speak to the film aspect of it as well, because I know you're into that.
Yeah, I think I've probably read everything published in English and in French, at least, about probably my all-time favorite movie, Blade Runner. Ridley Scott's original Blade Runner from 1982. And I know a lot about it. And if I have Blade Runner trivia contests with most people, probably other than Ridley Scott, I would probably win. Okay, I've read all the interviews. I know about this and that and the other thing, the technical stuff, the artistic stuff, the script. But what matters is that I can still sit down and watch it all these years later and just have my head blown philosophically, aesthetically, creatively, because what they did was so groundbreaking, so unusual, that even though it's bleak, dark, dystopian, AI, almost not quite horror movie, but it's disturbing.
Horrific.
And its implications, what does it mean to be a human? And what if you were a robot that thought you were a human, but you found out you weren't? Spoiler alert, but almost everyone's seen it by now, I hope.
Enough to make a second movie, right?
Yeah, exactly. What is important is that you can go away from that with an aesthetic experience that has made you ask yourself, so what does it mean to be a human? What does it mean to have a body, but also be more than just a body, to be a mind / soul / consciousness? What does that mean? And what does it mean to love? What does it mean to sacrifice? What does it mean to hate? What does it mean to be greedy? Right? And these are great questions for people to think about. It's not just a movie. I mean, it's a kind of a piece of artistic philosophy, which all the best philosophy and all the best art is. All great art is philosophical, and all great philosophy is artistic. This is why Plato is the greatest of the philosophers, because he doesn't write a bunch of dry treatises on idealism like Immanuel Kant, right? What he does is he basically writes what are almost like little plays. They're like little stories of people talking back and forth. What is justice? Oh, I know what justice is. Oh, tell me what justice is. Well, justice is this. No, that's an example of justice. That's not what it is. What do you mean? And they go back and forth, and 80 pages later, you have been thinking about justice in a way you never thought before.
Amazing.
It's artistic and it's philosophical. They're
Exactly.
not that far apart.
Right. And this actually plays into the next point, which I was going to ask you what the importance of, an education in the classics, a classical education, kind of like I mentioned in the introduction. And this kind of bounces off that. And I wanted to say too that I think a lot of kids, like we mentioned the anxiety thing, I think a lot of us kids or young adults feel that they are not allowed to ask those deep questions. What is life? All those deep things and that's why I asked about the importance of book smarts, or the importance of finding material to help you realize, that you're not alone, that somebody thought the same thing, we talk about that a lot on this show. So I wanted to know kind of what the importance of having a Socratic method and Socratic discussions based in the philosophers of old. Why do you see that in your teaching and reading and writing? Why do you see that as an important thing in today's day and age?
Yeah, that's a great 11-point question. That's good.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's great. The best questions are the ones that make you think for a long time.
Yeah.
Just to try and sort it out. If you think you shouldn't be asking these important questions, stop it. And if you're around anyone, any teacher, older person, mentor, friend, family member, whatever, professor, that says you shouldn't be asking these kind of, what is the meaning of life? Why is anything beautiful? How can you be happy, joyful? Run away from that person as fast as possible. What you want to do is surround yourself at every age with people who are probing you with questions. Or saying, well, why do you do this? People ask me, why do I climb mountains? I don't do it because I like to be sore for 3 days afterwards. There are reasons that go far beyond that are aesthetic and philosophical and spiritual and emotional. Yeah, the athletic, physical part it's important, but it's not even the most important thing at all. There's a satisfaction of being with my friends in a beautiful place for several hours or a day or two or something like that. I wrote an article a number of years ago called "The Socratic Method is Utterly Pagan and It's a Good Thing Too." And this is kind of written for perspective of a theologian that's trying to think through, why is it good for people who would consider themselves to be Christian believers to use a method that even in its name sounds pagan. And you can find it online and you can read it if you want to. It's published, but it's also available online. But that's kind of my approach to any kind of intellectual content is, does it work and what does it do? Right? Does it help you to think better? Right? Now you've had a number of years of education, K through 12 and a bunch of college, and you've studied film production and a lot of other kinds of things along the ways, and you've had all kinds of teachers. You've had the teachers who stand up front and blah 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 blah. You've had those, I call them the dormitory teachers, just go right to sleep, right? And then you have the teachers who teach you how to do something by putting your hands on it. Now, here's how you cut a scene, right, together, okay? And then those who show you how to make a sentence and then build a paragraph and then have a thesis and make an argument and write a paper or a book or whatever the case may be. And then there are the people who will sit down with you and they're just going to ask questions. 80-90% of what comes out of my mouth in almost all of my classes are questions. I do very little lecturing, maybe a little bit of introductory lecturing. I don't like lecturing. I'm pretty good at it. Most people I look at if I'm talking aren't, openly sleeping, right? But the best way to teach, the most invigorating, interesting way to teach, I've found across a wide variety of subjects, and since, the mid-90s and even before that, outside of the university level, is to ask questions. Like if I have students reading a novel or a poem or watching a movie or looking at a painting, the first thing I say is, what was it like to look at this painting? What was it like to read this book? You've heard this question many times. First, I want to start off with, what was your experience like? Well, I don't like it. Okay, that's perfectly fine. I don't care if you don't like what's on my syllabus or on my reading list, but now you need to tell me why. Don't just say it's stupid or it's ugly. You need to tell me, well, what does ugly mean? Well, what do you think would be beautiful? Right? Or why would this novel be more interesting than that poem? And so it immediately makes it sometimes looks more combative than lecturing, but actually it's inviting a person to enter into conversation with you, since you know a little bit more, you've got a little bit more experience. I will tell students all the time, it's like, we're all on a hike, and I may be 2 or 3 times your age, but we're all on a hike together, and I'm just the person that's a little bit out front because I've walked down this trail a few more times. But we're going to go slow, and we're going to listen to the birds and the waterfalls, and we're going to hear the crickets chirping and listen to the wind in the pine needles up above and so on and so forth. But I don't know everything. Far from it. I just know more than most of you about this one thing. So when you do this kind of Socratic dialogue instead of straight lecturing, which has its place, or showing people hands-on work, which is necessary for many kinds of crafts and trades, what you're doing is you're inviting a person to enter a circle as an equal, and you're going to have a discussion. Now, I might be more asking questions because I've been doing this a long time, and because I do know a little bit more than you on this subject, I can kind of anticipate questions. I've heard a lot of them before. I tend to know what some human thought patterns are on this particular subject, and so I can kind of guide the conversation a certain way that I'm several steps ahead of you, but I also know where we're going to be about 12 or 15 steps. It's like a beginner chess player playing with a master. The master can wipe you off the board with 7 moves. Or they can think ahead 50 moves, and you're trying to figure out, now, which one jumps this way? Is that the knight or the pawn? Right? So you just have someone who's more experienced, and what a Socratic, dialogician or teacher will do is they'll just take you to where you need to be, and it's not always a predetermined place. I don't know where, 90% of my discussions, I don't know exactly where they're going to go. I have certain parameters because of my values, because of my belief system, because of what I know and what I don't know. But I don't know where you're going to end up on that map. I don't. And so that makes teaching absolutely terrifying, really effective, and an awful lot of fun. It's hard. If you're bored, either as a teacher or a student, in a well-led Socratic dialogue, somebody's doing something wrong.
Wow. Boom. Wow. No comment. No, I was going to say that, personally, as a student, from a student experience at university, I feel that my time in Italy under your teaching was so profitable for me because I had heard a lot of things through lectures, even in the year that was after my freshman year. So I had done a year at that point. I heard a lot of people who were monotone, and kind of, I felt like I didn't draw anything out of that.
Yeah, if you get up at a lectern and you read your notes from grad school, that's not being a professor. Professors don't just teach, they profess. They're trying to sell you on something.
Yeah, ever broke down that word before? Profess.
It's like confess, right? You are making confiteor in Latin means to say the same thing or to agree with, right? So the whole idea, like in Catholic Church, you go to confession, or if you're a Protestant, you confess your sins to God, right? That's just agreeing with, saying the same with. Professor is a not dissimilar word, but it's more active. I am telling you, I'm not just teaching. Now, hopefully I'm a good teacher, but I am professing. This is important. Monet is important, right? Ridley Scott is important. Madame Bovary by Gustave Flaubert is important. Jackson Pollock, you may not like him, you may hate him, but he's important. Now, what are you going to do with that? So you are professing. That's the idea.
Wow. Yeah, and I feel as well as a lot of students, 2 of which are in the room that you've gone and taken to Italy, Chris and Emma.
And one of them was a pretty good student. I just like to pull the pins out of grenades and watch them.
Yeah, maybe that's part of your job description as well. But I was going to say that I felt that in my time there, I learned more important things. I mean, not to mention, I am totally right-brained. Like, I definitely am an artist. I've always been that way. It's been hard for me to take anything. I am a very rational, but it's hard for me to take left-brained information. Right. And so I felt like in my time there, under your teaching, and your consistency in not just classes, I think, honestly, I felt like I learned more from the walks in the museums and the discussions in the museums. But your approach to ask questions makes all of us ask questions in our,
That's right.
And that's, I guess, what
if
the
you
result
stop questioning,
is.
If you stop asking questions, you're dead. Now, that is not the same thing as saying, be a skeptic and question authority. Every time I see a question authority bumper sticker, I'm like, well, I'm questioning yours. Why should I believe you? You've got a Prius and you've got a question authority bumper. Why should I trust you? Nothing against Prius, right?
No.
Okay.
Well, they're dangerous. They could run somebody over without them hearing.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
It happens. It happens. But, my normal mode is the question asking, right? And so after, 20 or 30 minutes in their first class with me, you'll always get one student and they're like, why do you ask so many questions? And my response has been the same for about 25 years. I don't know. Why do you think I do that? I will always respond. He's seen it. She's seen it. Right? I will always respond to a question with a question because it's not a matter of being skeptical. It's a matter of being critical, and it's a matter of probing. Skepticism is not the same as being critical or being probing. Skepticism is the opposite of charity. Charity is believing the best of someone. Oh, I just met you. I'm going to believe the best about you, right? Which is what human beings should strive for. Does it mean you're going to get burned? Yep. I'd rather get burned and be a charitable person than to be a skeptic who just thinks poorly of people right off the bat. That's never any good. Always give people the benefit of the doubt. Even if, as me, you have a kind of a low view of what human nature is really capable of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we actually did a solo episode recently, and I say we because Chris was where you were seated, and we were just kind of, he was helping me moderate the conversation, but the topic was what defines success. Right. And we were chatting about how both of us, and the reason why I think we're really good friends is because we both link up on that same skeptical approach to things initially. And we've really had to challenge ourselves to be, I don't know about empathetic. I guess you could say empathetic, but I would say more compassionate in our approach, because we don't know everything. And for some reason, even though we are hyper aware, I feel like I've been blessed with a brain that doesn't stop thinking. I would rather have that than one that doesn't. But I notice so many things.
Both of your wheels are always turning.
And I think it's good and bad, because obviously you are able to pick out people's flaws faster because you recognize them. But that doesn't always mean you're smarter or better, because you can always learn from somebody who maybe doesn't think as fast but empathizes with you better. That's
right. Yeah, I've met people who, I've got a pretty fast processor, and I've met people that my initial impression is, well, they're not nearly as smart as me. They take a long time before they answer. They think really hard and they speak slow. And then I realize, no, I'm being a really arrogant jerk. And their slow, thoughtful responses are far more deep and perceptive and wise than anything I've ever done. So, yeah, there's all kinds of smarts and there's all kinds of dumb. And what you want to do is always aim at being charitable towards other people, wherever they happen to be at that time.
Yeah, because people could be at...
And I noticed this about you right away, because I knew that you were artistically inclined. I knew you liked film, and I knew a little bit about you and so on and so forth. And you did a great interview, so I thought you'd be a great person to have in Italy. And the first day that we came around that corner on Ricasoli, and you looked over there and you saw the Duomo in Florence, and see, the main reason I go to Italy now, because I've been like over 20 times, is just watching people's faces, right? Watching the reaction, like, because you've seen pictures of it, just like everyone knows what the Mona Lisa looks like and so on and so forth. But you came around that corner, and after 15 or 20 minutes of looking at it and taking photographs and walking around the city just for a very brief time, do you remember what you turned to me and said? You said, my entire understanding of what aesthetics has been completely blown away, and now it's going to be rebuilt, or something very much like that.
I think it was
You said it was completely, it is now being completely reordered. And I was like, good, because that's what education means.
Oh.
Education,
Dude,
right?
You're hitting me so hard.
The English word, so many English words, comes from Latin. Educere, ducere, means I lead or to lead, right? And educere means to lead out from yourself. So it leads you out from the ignorance and the insularity that you have in your own mind, and it leads you out, and it shows you there's a lot more than just you.
And in my case, I would say that I came out of adolescence, and I really attribute a lot of my growth as a person in this last year. I guess it's been a year. This last year and a little more, to the fact that I did do that trip, to the fact that I met my wonderful girlfriend on that trip, and and learning under your teaching and Professor Chua's teaching. And what a blessing to be able to, like I mentioned in the introduction, to be able to study the arts in the place that they were created.
Yeah, the entire modern world, in a very real sense, is invented in Italy in the Quattrocento of the 15th, 1500s, 15th, 16th century by these people who did not distinguish between arts and scientists. The painters were mathematicians. Alberti wrote Della Pittura on painting, but he was also geometrician and arithmetician, right? And Da Vinci was designing architecture, and he was painting things like no one else has ever painted before. Michelangelo did everything. The poets were also architects. Brunelleschi, who designed that giant cupola on the dome, was a Dante scholar. They didn't make these distinctions. We now have majors in school, and we have professions, and that's all great, right? But the fact that these people, they used to call him l'uomo universale, the universal man, was that you wanted to learn how to do as much as you could and do it well and do it beautifully. And the reason they did that was because as believers in God, they believed that man was in his created nature was divine and capable of many things.
Humanism.
And that's what classical humanism is, and you should do everything and you should do it well.
You know what's funny about that is I mean, this could branch off into a million things, but the humanism, like we just touched on that's so fascinating to me, that somebody who doesn't believe in God or who doesn't know God, like, we haven't really delved into this on the show, and I don't want to go too much into that detail, but I will say that it is fascinating to me that people can live their whole life and not acknowledge that's, God created this planet. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And everything that happens. Yeah. And I think Italy is so fascinating in that way, because to me, I'd never seen so much art, especially when we walked through, when we were walking through the Vatican in Rome. Oh, we only saw a 16th of the place.
It's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
It's just staggering.
Yeah.
Yeah, you feel drunk afterwards. You're just like, I'm just not even sure what happened to me. It's just too much. Yeah. It's too much.
Yeah,
it's too much.
Too much stuff. Yeah. But why is that all there? Why is that all put into place? Yeah. And as an artist, I would say that somebody in America would be foolish to not have an opportunity. But see, I would never have thought of that if you didn't start that program. And I said, oh, okay. Mom and Dad were like, hey, you should go to Italy. And I was like, okay, I'll try it. But I would not even be half of where, the man I am now, half of where I'm at artistically and all of that, if it wasn't for that trip, because I learned how to use reason and reason through my art.
That's right.
And for some reason, I never had thought of that.
And art is not a purely, merely rational thing, but it's also not merely emotive like the classical post-romantic, the Van Goghs and the Beethovens, they're these tortured geniuses. I got a friend who makes his living as a watercolorist. He's a brilliant painter. He's a great theologian, a great philosopher, wonderful guy. And he is like a super careful, rational, thoughtful person, but he is also, and he'll tell you, but I also have intense emotion. And yeah, people will have oversimplified ideas, all artists are crazy. No, they're not. They can be, they could also maybe be an accountant. I mean, it doesn't necessarily work that way. But your experience with the Italy program was exactly the kind of thing that I'm trying to do for people, which again is educare, which is to lead you out from yourself. An interesting related word is seducere, to lead into yourself, seduce. The worst kind of seduction is self-seduction, where you remain completely inside of yourself and you just don't develop that empathy and that desire to understand the experience of other humans by reading books, watching movies, having conversations with people that you don't know or that you might disagree with wildly on all kinds of things. And that kind of self-seduction, because say is a reflexive pronoun, it's the ducere, the leading is back into the self, is unbelievably destructive. It's just like the Narcissus story, right? I mean, one of the new classes I have in Italy that we did this year, you're going to be mad and jealous now, Renaissance cultural history. Oof. Right? And it's almost all primary sources where we're reading, what is it like to eat in the Renaissance? How did they get their clothing? But we started reading a bunch of actual manuscript letters that I've photographed in the archives, the research archives I worked in. So we were reading letters between Lorenzo de' Medici and this humanist scholar who was teaching his kids while Medici was trying to survive, assassination attempts, and the kids are off hiding in these castles in the woods. And then we started reading love letters from England during Shakespeare's time. And you're seeing people are what they have always been. We're these beautiful, complex organisms with that are more than matter, but we're not less than a soul or mind or spirit or consciousness or whatever term that you prefer. And the whole purpose of education is to show you that and to open up the world to your mind and open up your mind to the world and to prevent the seducere, to keep you from seducing yourself and remaining entirely inward and never developing charity and empathy and desire for service towards other people. And I think Christianity in its best sense, in its best form, will always teach you that, right? That's why all these great artists in the Renaissance, late Middle Ages, Renaissance, and all these great scholars were, as I call them, the Christian humanist scholars. They're the ones that invent humanism, which is simply the studia humanitatis, the study of the human things. It's a great and glorious thing to study, astronomy and to study, the ocean and to study weather and biology and zoology. But it's also a great and glorious thing to study man and his works, the good and the bad. And there's nothing like it. And I think you remember in the interview I said, you'll learn more in one day in Italy than a semester in another class. You learn
that's very
so
true.
much. It's so dense. It's overwhelming. It's just the tidal wave. And I told you guys, the first week or two, you're completely overwhelmed. Weeks, 3 and 4, you're starting to get in the groove. You know how to order a cappuccino, right? And weeks 4 and 5, you're starting to get upset because you realize you're going to leave. Because you're living inside of history. If you're living in a house that was built in the 1400s, right? Christopher remembers the first day we got there, I said, think about all the things that happened in this house. The people who were born there. We're one villa down from the Medici's favorite country villa. It's the next big villa up, Cafaggiolo. Lorenzo de' Medici and the other the Medici people that financed the Renaissance certainly came into Villa Montazzi where we live. Of course they did. Everyone visited everyone's villas. Then think about, now, it is the Italian Renaissance. Who was murdered in this house? What plots were conspired in this house? What people fell in love in this house, and so on and so forth. You are living inside history because it's the best classroom.
Wow. Amazing. Wow, I feel like I need to take a moment to grab my thoughts because I want to. We're going to go to a break real quick, and then I want to come back and briefly talk about climbing because I feel like we can't put those right together. So we'll be right back, and we'll start right into rock climbing with Dr. Horner. Hi, welcome back. We're running a little short on time, so Dr. Horner's just kind of give us like kind of a brief overview of climbing and kind of his experience. And you were just telling me if you wanted to kind of make that correction to the point I made about El Capitan at the beginning, you can about just the speed record and all that. Oh, sure.
Yeah, I wish I had the speed record for speed climbing El Capitan. I know a number of the people the record has traded back and forth a number of times. It's actually gotten very, very fast. But what I did was actually something a little bit different. El Capitan is a huge cliff. If you can picture vertical, so think Empire State Building, stack up 1, 2, 3 of them, and then lean the last one out a little bit so it's overhanging. That's the cliff, and you can drive to within a 10-minute walk of the base in Yosemite Valley. So people in Yosemite Valley, they're driving in their cars and they're going, what in the world is that? And if you have binoculars, you can see little climbers up there. Oh, so it is usually considered the ultimate pinnacle of achievement to do an El Capitan route. I know a guy that has climbed El Capitan over 100 times. I know a lot of people who have done it 40 or 50 times. I have one kind of climbing acquaintance who has the dubious honor of having been helicoptered off twice, right, during horrible storms where people were dying all around him. But what makes this gigantic wall unusual is it's very perfect, very difficult climbing on perfect, flawless granite. I mean, it's as smooth as drywall with little thin cracks running up it. And yeah, you have to be just insanely fit to do something like El Capitan. It is the province of the super, super, super elite climbers. Even the top 10% of climbers in the world are like, man, one day I'd like to climb El Capitan. Maybe 1 out of 500 would ever even go there and actually try it. It's had a very, very high failure rate. It's incredibly intimidating, difficult, and exhausting. So the first time it was climbed actually over a number of attempts over a year and a half, and it took a total of about 40 or 50 days of climbing up and down, up and down, up and down, trying to figure out how to finally get to the top. Nowadays, there are a very small group of us who are, experienced climbers that do it in 24 hours or less. Right, the first time it was done was 1975. It's called the NIAD, N-I-A-D, Nose in a Day. You can Google it, NIAD list, and you'll see all the climbers, and it's not that many who've done the Nose in a Day, who've climbed this kind of southwest corner of El Capitan in a day. There are routes all over El Capitan. There's probably 80 or 90 separate routes that you can do, and they're all very, very difficult. There's nothing at all easy on the big wall up there. And what's incredible about doing this is it completely skewers your sense of proportion, right? If you go out and you do like a 50 or 100 foot rock climber, you go to a little indoor rock climbing gym and climb up the little plastic holes, what I call the miniature golf of rock climbing. You think, whoa, that's really great. I did like 8 moves, but this is thousands of feet where every move is very, very, very difficult. And what happens is, as you're going higher and higher and higher, you see the trees getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And finally, you're looking down at these 150-foot Ticonderoga pines at the floor of Yosemite Valley, and they just look like little shrubs down there. And you can see little cars going along, and you'll see the tram with all what we call the Tourons, the Yosemite tourists, on the tram, and they stop at the bottom of El Capitan. And if you look closely up above, you might be able to pick out insane rock climbers hanging on the side of the wall. And we're up there laughing, woo, this kind of stuff. But as you go up higher and higher and higher, the floor of the valley seems to get further and further away, which it is. But it's so huge that the rim, which might be at the base 3,000 feet above you, after a couple days of climbing might be 2,000 feet. After several days of climbing beyond that, it might still be 1,000 feet above you. It just seems to never get closer. So it's like you're running and they keep moving the finish line. And so it's very psychologically disturbing. It's this weird thing in rock climbing where when you're close on the cliff, the foreshortening hides how much climbing there is left to do. And so people actually get lost. I was actually on El Capitan once. I was at about the 600-700 foot level. We had been climbing for about an hour and a half, and there was a Korean party of 5 people, and they'd been up there for 2 days. And I'm looking at the guy, and he actually has his little topo map that shows the route. It's a little diagram, and he's over here, and I'm like, what route are you on? He's like, I'm on the nose. I'm like, no, we're on the nose. You're on. I don't know what you're on, but he'd actually gotten lost. Oh. And I was like, how are you guys doing? Have you done this before? No, this is our first time. Well, how much food, water do you have? And after he told me, I said, you need to go down. If it took you 2 days to go 500, 600, 700 feet and you're lost, you don't want to end up 1,800, 2,400 feet up and be out of water or not have what you need to survive a storm or anything like that. So most people who climb El Capitan, they're hauling up huge bags of gear, and there's a lot of complicated engineering, with pulleys to bring your gear up behind you. But the speed climbers, what we do is we put on a little bullet pack, right? It wouldn't even hold a gallon of water. And you put in, some cheese and some nuts, and you have a very, very light windbreaker, and you go. And instead of taking the huge amount of gear that you use for safety, you use, a smaller, lighter, thinner rope usually, and you use the lightest gear you can get, and you pare it down to an absolute bare minimum, which means you can't get caught in a storm. You're going to be pretty cold if you get caught in the night out, but it allows you to move more quickly because the longer you plan on taking, the more food and water you have to have, which is more weight, which slows you down, and so it becomes a kind of a logistical, pyramidical problem. But if you're going very, very light, it does increase the risk in some certain ways unless you really know exactly what you're doing, but it allows you to sprint. So I once did the nose, and we had been climbing for about 6 hours, and we passed a party that was on their 3rd day, and they were just waking up from their portaledges. They were sleeping in like these little portable canopy tents that you'll haul up the wall there. And they had just started a little thing to cook themselves some coffee, right? The sun wasn't even up yet. I'm leading, and I'm climbing with my headlamp, putting my hands in the cracks and my toes in the cracks and climbing up. And I was like, climber below, don't drop anything, and I'm going to climb around your portaledge, and I'm going to clip into this belay and keep going because my partner Simon climbing below me. And they're like, dude, when did you start? I was like, this morning. We started at 2 a.m. and it's like 6 or 7 in the morning and the sun's not out. And yeah, we just kind of do that. I mean, the most people I've lapped on El Cap was about 9 parties. I once passed 9 parties that were up there for various kind of stages of the climb. I don't do it just because it's athletic, and I'm not an adrenaline junkie. I don't like adrenaline. It doesn't feel good.
Well, that's ironic.
Right? Okay. It is scary, but you learn how to manage the fear. So it provides you a tremendous amount of self-discipline. I got through graduate school successfully because I learned how to control my emotional state and to stay focused on the one task at hand, which is do this, do that, and don't mess up. And it puts you in a place that very few people ever see. No photographs, no video can ever capture what it is like to be on top of something that is 3 times the height of the Empire State Building and vertical and overhanging, and you're going up there with your fingers and your toes. There's nothing like it in the world. It's absolutely astonishing.
Well,
it's absolutely astonishing.
I wish we could go into more detail, but to sum it up for you, Grant is just a well-rounded individual. Put on that hat, sir,
Getting around
because now you got to show people the iconic hat. This is our Indiana Jones of the school, and I'm so glad to have you on. I'm so thankful for your influence in my life, and you're just you're a well-rounded, just great man, and I can't believe how much you have accomplished throughout your life, and it's exciting, and I think it's going to be exciting for these people that watch the show to watch. Yeah. So thank you guys for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at 1 in 20 Show. We're growing a lot, and there's a lot of huge stuff coming We're very excited about it. I don't think you're really expecting what's coming. All of us are grinning because you'll be very excited when it comes. But thank you for watching, and have a wonderful day.